Your soulmate showed your photo to someone. Their reaction changed everything. Something happened in a quiet room that your soulmate never expected anyone to notice. They pulled out their phone, opened your photo, and turned the screen towards someone sitting across from them. For a moment, nobody spoke. The other person simply stared at your face. Then their expression changed. Not confusion. Not surprise. Something much deeper. They looked back at your soulmate and asked a question so unexpected that the entire conversation suddenly took a different direction. And the strange part is this: your soulmate already seemed to know that question was coming. There was something about the way they showed your picture that revealed more than words ever could. They didn't scroll through a collection of photos. They didn't casually say, "This is someone I know." They paused before showing it, almost as if they were deciding whether they were ready to let another person see what this connection meant to them. Their thumb hovered over the screen. Their breathing slowed. Then your face appeared. The person across from them leaned closer, studied the picture for several seconds, and quietly said, "Wait, this is the person you were talking about?" Your soulmate didn't answer immediately. They just smiled. A small, almost helpless smile that appeared when someone has been trying to hide how much they truly care. And that reaction told the other person everything. But here's where the story becomes even more interesting. The person didn't simply compliment your appearance or ask where the photo was taken. Instead, they looked directly at your soulmate and said something that seemed to touch a nerve. They asked, "Do they know how you feel about them?" Silence filled the room. Your soulmate looked down at the phone, then back at your picture. That tiny pause carried an entire story. Because sometimes the person who knows us best can recognize our feelings long before we're brave enough to admit them ourselves. And apparently, something about your photo made that truth impossible to hide. Stay with this, because the reaction that followed wasn't random. It revealed a side of your soulmate they've been keeping carefully protected. Your soulmate finally began explaining why your picture was on their phone. Their voice became softer. They talked about something you had done, something that might have seemed ordinary to you but stayed with them long after the moment ended. They remembered your expression, the way you spoke, even a small detail you probably assumed nobody noticed. The other person listened without interrupting. Then they looked at the photo again. This time, their expression wasn't questioning. It was understanding. They seemed to realize that your soulmate wasn't simply talking about someone they found attractive. They were talking about someone who had changed the way they felt about their own future. And then came the sentence your soulmate wasn't prepared to hear: "I think you already know what you need to do." Your soulmate went completely still. Because suddenly, showing your photo wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was the beginning of a decision. And the next thing they revealed may explain why everything between you feels different now. The room went quiet after those words, but your soulmate didn't look away from your photo. Instead, they enlarged the picture slightly, almost unconsciously, as if one more second of looking at you might help them find the courage they had been missing. The person sitting across from them noticed it immediately. "You really care about this person, don't you?" they asked. Your soulmate gave a small laugh, but there was no confidence behind it. They looked down, then admitted something they hadn't planned to say out loud: they had been trying to figure out whether what they felt was temporary or something they couldn't simply walk away from. And according to the reaction of the person listening, the answer was already obvious. They pointed at the photo and said, "You don't look at someone like that when they're just a passing chapter." That sentence landed differently. Your soulmate became unusually quiet, because deep down, they knew exactly what the other person had just recognized. Then something even more personal came into the conversation. The person asked your soulmate what they remembered most about you. Not your appearance. Not your social life. Not anything superficial. They wanted to know what stayed in their mind when you weren't around. Your soulmate thought for a moment and started describing a moment involving you that seemed almost insignificant from the outside. Maybe it was a conversation that lasted only a few minutes. Maybe it was the way you listened when everyone else was talking. Maybe it was something you said without realizing how deeply it would affect them. But as they described it, their expression softened. They weren't trying to impress anyone anymore. They were simply remembering you. The person across from them listened carefully, then smiled and said, "That's why you keep coming back to this." Your soulmate looked at your picture again. And for the first time, they seemed to understand that the real story wasn't about why they showed your photo. It was about why they couldn't stop thinking about you after they did. And if you're wondering what happened after that conversation, here's the detail that changes the entire meaning of the moment. The person who had seen your photo didn't tell your soulmate to forget you, move on, or wait for something better. Instead, they gave them surprisingly simple advice: stop trying to predict the outcome and be honest about what you actually want. Your soulmate sat there quietly, processing every word. Then they unlocked their phone again. Your photo was still on the screen. They stared at it for a few seconds before saying, "I just don't want to mess this up." That confession revealed more than any dramatic declaration could have. Because beneath the hesitation was something genuine, the fear of losing an opportunity that actually mattered. If this story is connecting with you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoy stories about unexpected relationship moments like this, you can subscribe and stay with the journey. But don't leave yet, because your soulmate was about to make a small decision after that conversation. And that decision would reveal whether they were finally ready to stop hiding what your picture had already made impossible to deny. The decision seemed small at first. Your soulmate placed the phone face down on the table and sat there in complete silence, as though they were trying to settle an argument inside themselves. The person across from them waited. Then, instead of changing the subject, your soulmate picked up the phone again and opened your photo one more time. "I think I'm tired of pretending this doesn't matter to me," they finally said. Those words changed the atmosphere instantly. The other person didn't smile or celebrate. They simply nodded, because they understood what had just happened. Your soulmate wasn't making some dramatic promise. They were admitting something much more powerful. They had reached the point where hiding their feelings was becoming harder than expressing them. And that realization had been triggered by one simple thing: the way another person reacted after seeing your face. But there was another detail you need to hear. The person who had seen your photo suddenly asked your soulmate something very specific. What do you think they would say if you told them the truth? Your soulmate looked surprised. They hadn't expected the question to come back to you so directly. For several seconds, they said nothing. Then they started imagining the conversation. They pictured your expression. They imagined the first few seconds of silence. They wondered whether you'd smile, become emotional, or simply ask why they had waited so long. And as they talked through those possibilities, their voice changed. The uncertainty slowly gave way to hope. They realized they weren't actually afraid of your response. They were afraid of never finding out. That distinction mattered. Because sometimes the biggest obstacle isn't rejection, it's the endless question of, what if? And suddenly, your soulmate seemed determined to stop living inside that question. Then came the moment nobody expected. Your soulmate opened the messaging screen and hovered over your name. Their finger rested above the keyboard. They typed a sentence. Deleted it. Tried again. Deleted that too. The person beside them watched without saying a word. Finally, your soulmate wrote something simple. Nothing dramatic, nothing rehearsed, just an honest message that carried the weight of everything they hadn't said. They stared at it for several seconds. Their heart was clearly racing, but this time they didn't close the screen. They didn't put the phone away. They didn't convince themselves to wait another day. They pressed send. And somewhere else, completely unaware of what had just happened behind that screen, you were about to receive a message that began with ordinary words but carried an extraordinary meaning. Because the person who had just seen your photo had unknowingly pushed your soulmate toward the one action they had been postponing, and the next few words on your screen could reveal exactly what your soulmate has been trying to say all along. Something shifted the instant your soulmate pressed send. The message was already gone, sitting quietly on your screen before they could take it back. For a few seconds, they simply stared at the conversation, almost expecting the world to change around them. The person beside them leaned back and said nothing. Then your soulmate exhaled and whispered, "At least now they know." But what they didn't realize was that sending that message wasn't the biggest revelation of the night. The biggest revelation came from the person who had seen your photo. They picked up the phone again, looked carefully at the picture, and said, "There's something about them that explains why you've been different lately." Your soulmate looked up immediately. "Different how?" they asked. The answer was simple: more thoughtful, more patient, more hopeful. They had apparently noticed changes in your soulmate long before your soulmate understood them themselves. Then the conversation took a completely unexpected turn. Instead of asking about your relationship status or your history together, the person asked one question: when you imagine the next year of your life, are they in it? Your soulmate didn't answer quickly this time. They looked toward the window, watching the lights outside move across the glass. You could almost see the memories passing through their mind. Conversations. Small moments. Things left unsaid. Times when they wanted to reach out but convinced themselves there would be a better moment. And then they finally smiled. "Yeah," they said quietly. "I think that's what scares me." The person nodded. Because that answer revealed something important. This wasn't simply about missing someone. Your soulmate had started imagining a future where your presence mattered. And once someone begins picturing you in the life they're building, ignoring those feelings becomes much harder. But there was still one thing your soulmate hadn't told anyone. They had kept your photo for a reason that went beyond remembering you. It was connected to a moment when they had felt completely uncertain about where their life was heading. During that period, they would occasionally look at your picture, not because they expected you to solve anything, but because your face reminded them of a version of themselves they wanted to become again. Someone more open. More genuine. More willing to believe that something meaningful could still happen. When they finally admitted this, the other person smiled and said, "Then maybe you're not supposed to keep this person in your phone. Maybe you're supposed to let them know what they mean to you." Your soulmate looked at the message they had already sent. For the first time that night, they weren't second-guessing themselves. They were waiting. And just when they thought the conversation was over, your reply appeared on the screen. Their eyes widened. They read it once. Then again. And whatever you had written back was enough to make them sit completely still, because it wasn't the response they had prepared themselves for. The message on the screen was short, but your soulmate read it as if every word carried a hidden meaning. They didn't respond right away. Their eyes moved slowly across the screen, then stopped at one particular sentence. The person sitting nearby noticed the sudden change in their expression. "What did they say?" they asked. Your soulmate smiled, almost in disbelief. They remembered it too. That was the part they hadn't expected. The memory they had been carrying alone, the little moment they thought mattered only to them, was something you had quietly remembered as well. Suddenly, the distance between you didn't feel quite as large. Two people had been holding on to the same moment from completely different sides, neither knowing the other had kept it close. Your soulmate placed the phone down and looked away for a second, overwhelmed by the realization. The photo that started the conversation had opened a door neither person had realized was still waiting to be opened. But then the person who had seen your picture asked something even more revealing. "Why do you think they remembered that?" Your soulmate stared at the screen again. They could have given a simple answer. Instead, they admitted they didn't know. And that uncertainty made them smile. Because for so long, they had been trying to analyze every interaction, every pause, every message, searching for proof that the connection was real. Now they were beginning to understand that not everything meaningful arrives with a clear explanation. Sometimes the evidence is hidden inside the smallest details. The fact that you remembered. The fact that they remembered. The fact that your photo had been important enough to show someone else. And suddenly, the person across from them said something that made your soulmate laugh softly. "Maybe you've been waiting for certainty when what you really needed was courage." Your soulmate looked at your name on the screen again. This time, they didn't hesitate. They began typing another message, but this one was different. There was no carefully constructed excuse to start a conversation. No casual question designed to hide the real reason they were reaching out. They simply told you that seeing your photo had made them realize something they could no longer ignore. They didn't make exaggerated promises. They didn't try to force an outcome. They just opened the door and left it unlocked. Then they pressed send. The room became quiet again. Your soulmate leaned back, almost relieved. And the person beside them looked at your photo one final time before saying, "Now I understand why you showed me." Your soulmate smiled and answered, "So do I." What they didn't know was that this conversation had created a chain reaction neither of them could see yet. Because the person who reacted to your photo wasn't just recognizing your importance, they had noticed one tiny detail in the picture that your soulmate had completely overlooked. And when they pointed it out, your soulmate's entire expression changed. The tiny detail was almost invisible at first. The person leaned closer to the screen and pointed toward the corner of your photo. "Look at that," they said. Your soulmate frowned, trying to understand what they meant. It wasn't anything dramatic. It was something in your expression, a subtle smile, the relaxed way you were looking at the camera, the unmistakable sense that you weren't trying to impress anyone. The person studied it for another second before saying, "That's why." Your soulmate laughed softly. "Why what?" The answer came slowly, "Because you don't look like someone who's waiting for attention. You look like someone who's completely comfortable being yourself." Your soulmate became quiet. They had never described you that way before, but hearing someone else say it made them rethink all those moments when they had been drawn toward you without knowing exactly why. Maybe it wasn't one perfect moment. Maybe it was the way you made everything around you feel more genuine without even trying. Then the conversation became surprisingly honest. Your soulmate admitted that they had spent a lot of time wondering whether they were imagining the connection. They had questioned whether certain conversations meant more than they seemed to. They had wondered if you noticed the small things they noticed. And every time uncertainty appeared, they would pull back. But now, after showing your photo to someone else, they were seeing the situation from a completely different angle. The person across from them said, "You've been waiting for a sign that it's okay to care. Maybe you already have one." Your soulmate looked down at their phone. Your name was still there. The message they had sent was still waiting for your response. But instead of feeling anxious, they seemed calmer. They had finally stopped trying to control what happened next. They had simply told the truth. And sometimes, that is the moment when a complicated story becomes surprisingly simple. There was still one final question, though. The person looked at your soulmate and asked, "If they called you right now, what would you say?" Your soulmate smiled, but this time there was no hesitation. They said they would tell you that they were glad they hadn't stayed silent. They would tell you that your presence had mattered more than they had admitted. And they would tell you that showing your photo had made them realize something important. They weren't embarrassed by how deeply they cared. They were proud of it. Then the phone suddenly lit up again. A new notification appeared. Your soulmate looked at it and froze, not because something was wrong, but because the timing was almost unbelievable. Your response had arrived at the exact moment they finished saying those words. They opened it slowly. The person beside them watched their face change as they read. And this time, your soulmate didn't say anything at all. They simply turned the screen around and showed them your reply. The reaction on the other person's face made your soulmate realize that your message contained something neither of them had expected to see. The person across from your soulmate read your message once, then looked up with an expression that said they had just discovered something important. "You need to read that again," they said. Your soulmate already had. Twice. Maybe 3 times. Because your words weren't dramatic, but they carried something your soulmate had been hoping for without admitting it: recognition. You had noticed the change. You had noticed the honesty behind the message. And most importantly, you hadn't treated their feelings like something strange or inconvenient. Your soulmate leaned back, closed their eyes for a moment, and let out a quiet breath. All the tension they'd been carrying seemed to loosen. The person beside them smiled and said, "Now you understand why I reacted to your photo." Your soulmate opened their eyes. "What do you mean?" The answer came gently, "Because when you talk about them, you sound like someone who finally feels understood." For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then your soulmate began talking about something they'd never really explained before. They admitted that your connection had made them reconsider what they actually wanted from a relationship.